Hi, I'm Dave Henning with the Fresh Start Podcast, fresh ideas for business and personal growth. And today I'm very happy and excited to have as my guest Marvin Storm from the Sacramento area, husband, entrepreneur, grandfather, podcaster, disciple of Christ, exit strategist, mediocre golfer, and skier. What's up with that? Welcome.
Well, I thought when I kind of exited my business, I would have a lot more time for that skiing and golfing, but I'm just not very good at it, and it's not all that enjoyable. The only people I can beat are my grandkids. So,
Well, have you thought about miniature
and
golf?
that's not going to last very long. They're hot on the trail. They're going to overtake me any day now. So,
Well, my family felt sorry for me a few years ago, and for Christmas I got some golf lessons. So that at least helped me to find my ball, try to keep it in the fairway. I call golfing hiking in the woods and looking for a little white ball. It's all fun though, right? It's good. It's good fresh air, good for you. So tell me a little bit about your background. You've been a business owner, but also I'm just curious, real quick. You've served as a missionary in Africa, and I've spent a lot of time over in Kenya with the schools that we've been building over there. So just real quickly, tell me where you were over in Africa.
well, I had the opportunity early in my life, my early 20s and late teens and early 20s to travel, most of Southern Africa. I've been in Kenya. I've been in, you know, Botswana and, what was then Rhodesia and Zimbabwe, the capital there, Zimbabwe now. And it was just a fascinating experience all through Southern Africa. I got to travel all over there, Mozambique. So I got to see a lot of the country. And one thing I learned in that experience is that so often people that don't travel outside of the United States have this vision that, they know everything and are better than other people in different parts of the world. And one thing that I learned very quickly was that, in all the countries that I've been in and seen and got to live, with the people of all different economic strata, from, those that, were on the lower end and those that were mid and up. People have, values and family families and the hierarchical, traditions that they've created over generations and centuries. Just gave me a great appreciation for, different cultures, different, ways of thinking. And one thing that I think ties the human family together is just the core belief in the family unit. Almost any culture that you go into has that core foundation of the family unit. And that's one of the things I took away. But when I did get back to the United States and landed at JFK in New York, I literally got down and kissed the ground because it was good to be back in the United States and having seen the abject poverty and different things that you see in other parts of the world and how blessed we really are in this country. We just take so much for granted. It's almost embarrassing sometimes.
That's right. One of the big things that impressed me, we were down in the southwestern Kenya near Tanzania border and the Masai Mara and all that. So it was the Maasai tribe that we built these schools for, where they really didn't have access to them. But I was always impressed with the fact that the entrepreneurial spirit for people that don't have electricity, don't have running water, but they've all got cell phones. And a lot of them have set up little kind of kiosks and have kind of an entrepreneurial business mind and just have figured things out. But at least amongst the people that we have worked with, the Kenyan that are certified teachers and our staff, they're happy. They're happy in spite of what they don't have, right?
It really is amazing. I think that's one of the things I notice is that they're just genuinely happy because they focus on things that are meaningful. It's those personal relationships, and regardless of their personal, financial, or in health situations, and the ability to provide for their family may be minimal. but they're generally happy people. They sing, they dance, they socialize, and they don't have as many of the burdens that we carry in, the first world country. These third world countries, they seem to shed all of the problems that we have, and don't have to worry about a lot of the things that we do. And so it was an educational experience. I was over there for nearly 3 years, so it was a good experience.
It's all about perspective. And speaking of perspective, you sold your business a while back. You thought, well, I'm just going to take it easy and enjoy life. And then you turned out to be bored stiff. And so you decided to kind of jump back into action. You've got your podcast, Business Exit Stories podcast. You've written a book, Pack Your Parachute, How to Double the Amount of Money if you were to sell your business and how to do that.
Yeah, well, I'm writing that book. It should be out early next year, but
okay.
so I'm hot on the trail, So I'm pulling all the experiences I've had and other people that have had, and that I've taken case studies from the podcast and put it into. Because I get a lot of requests, for okay, what do I do next type of thing, and how do I really, don't drop the ball on this last lap of the race so I can exit profitably. And amazingly, a lot of people don't. That's really sad sometimes.
Sure, absolutely. I've owned different companies and worked for other people, worked for myself, and I've owned a janitorial business and a carpet cleaning business, and sold cars, insurance agency, and all different kinds of things. But I think as business owners, like you're saying, going into it, we're thinking about meeting the budget, making a profit, paying the employees, and we don't necessarily think much about an exit plan, right? So tell us about your entrepreneurial journey.
Well, I came out of college and I grew up in an entrepreneurial family. My father had his own business. He was a mechanic, had his own shop and garage, and had other people working for him. And he never got beyond eighth grade, and did very well for himself. I was born in the Midwest in a small town, and business owners, the people that were in the middle to upper middle class, social strata when I was growing up were the businessmen, and the doctors and the attorneys. They're the ones that seem to do well. And but my father, overcoming all that he had to overcome, really wanted me to get an education, and didn't really want me to follow in his footsteps. And so I did. I went and got an education, graduated in accounting, and I went to work for a large national accounting firm, one of the big eight at the time, now big four. And after a while, I decided that accounting just wasn't my gig, and I played pickup basketball with a group on Tuesday evenings for years, and met a guy there, and one thing led to another, and we ended up turning in our resignations for our respective, employers, and striking out on our own. We set up shop in what was then downtown Oakland, and in the 13th floor of a high rise there, and had two desks facing each other and a telephone, and we were in business. And that was a great ride. We did very well. It was more of a situation of being in the right place at the right time with the right concept. And we made a lot of money. We did very well. But circumstances change, both personally, our goals and objectives changed, and what he wanted to do, what I wanted to do. And we eventually decided that we needed to part ways and go our separate ways, and I did, and he did, and we both, became successful in what we were doing. And I got involved in, another business at that time that was, on a more national basis, and started out regional, and then on a national. I acquired a company that had a national footprint, and was able to turn that company around. It was a turnaround situation that I got involved in. And sold that business, spun another company out of that. So I had two, a business company and a business to consumer division. And a few years ago, as I said, I exited those. And when I thought back, and I was taking some time to reflect, and kind of what did I want to do? Did I want to just continue coasting, because often, you spend so much time with the pedal to the metal,
Right.
just going 60 miles an hour, and never looking up. You're just really focused on scaling and growing your business. You don't have a lot of time to think about how you're going to get out of this business. And that was somewhat the case with myself. Uh, when it came time to sell, I had brought in private equity into the company. And so I was dealing with boards of directors and bankers and attorneys. And when I got ready to exit, I hadn't been down this road. I'd sold, smaller businesses before, with just, 20, 30 employees. And, this was an entirely different level and scale. And I just didn't know the ropes. I didn't know the process as well as I should have. It turned out okay, but I could have done better, and perhaps a lot better, if I'd have been more dialed in to the strategy and the thought process and what I needed to do in advance. And so as I thought about this, I said, I'm just going to do a podcast, because I love listening to podcasts. I have half a dozen or so that I listen to, almost daily. And so I started this podcast, and I decided to interview deal makers, the people that actually facilitate the transactions. These are CPAs, mergers and acquisition specialists, investment bankers. I just had an interview today with an investment banking group, boutique investment banking firm that worked with mid-sized companies, small to mid-sized companies. And it's just fascinating on what can be done if you plan well. And sadly, some of the stories they share, the transactions that are talked about on the podcast, don't turn out very well. And some devastatingly tragic stories on how that last lap, when they dropped the baton before they got across the finish line. And I've had some stories where it was a year earlier, it was worth a $5 million, and they had an offer on the table for $5 million to sell their business, and circumstances of just not being prepared and positioned properly. With less than 2 years later, they ended up closing the business, and an entire lifetime of work down. In that particular case, it was several generations of work, hard toil and risk taking down the drain and turning into really nothing. And so it's not that exiting your business is difficult. It's just that you don't do it very often, so you aren't familiar with it. And there is a process involved. There are things that you can do to tremendously deleverage the exit process and not take as much risk, and be able to get things teed up so that when it comes time to step away from your business, things are ready. You're in the starting blocks, ready to go. So often, exits are triggered by events. It may be an illness, a death, a divorce, a partner problem, burnout, competitors coming in, technology change, whatever the situation is. But it's an external event that triggers the process and the thinking of, I think I need to get out of this business. I need to sell. And generally, when it's event driven, it's too late. You're scrambling, you're running for the exits. So whenever you're running for the exits, bad things happen. And it doesn't have to be that way. If you have everything ready and that's why I named my book, Pack Your Parachute, because pilots, they don't pack their parachute when the engines are on fire. The parachute is packed, they grab it and they go. And using that metaphor in business, if you have your parachute packed, even though you don't know when you're exactly going to use it, but you're ready, if an unexpected event comes up, heaven forbid, you grab that parachute and you're ready to go. And within weeks or months of making that decision, you can be walking away with a big pile of money versus a small bag of money. Tremendous difference in that whole process and thought process and positioning primarily. So
one of my favorite shows is Shark Tank, where you see people go on and they talk about, well, I want to start this business. And of course, they have these professionals, Cuban and all those guys, tell them, no, that's horrible, or this is great. And that's, people maybe in the Silicon Valley, for example, where I lived, they're working in tech, but they have this idea that, hey, I make these great bagels, I should open a restaurant, or I should start this other business. And you get into it. But to your point about the parachute, my question would be, how soon should somebody be thinking in terms of this? I know when you first start a business, you're, like you were saying, you're just really on fire, at least for the first month or two, till things happen, perhaps, and reality sets in. But how soon should somebody be that far in advance? What would you suggest?
That's a great question, and one that I don't think there's any definitive answer for. Years ago, I was in a roundtable discussion with some other business owners and entrepreneurs, and they were talking about selling their business, and some in the group were, a decade away from selling, and some were a few years away from selling. And one of the more senior members of the group made the comment that, don't worry about exiting your business. Just build a great business and the exit will take care of itself. And I've often thought about that, but the data really doesn't bear that out. That's a great sentiment, and it does work sometimes. You build a great business and the exit just sort of magically happens. But that's the exception rather than the rule.
Right.
Statistics show that 80%, if you can believe this, when I first heard this a few years ago, I just couldn't believe it, that 80% of all businesses that are listed for sale, now these are big businesses and small businesses and the whole wide range of businesses that are listed for sale, actually don't get sold. And if they don't get sold, that means the entrepreneur is going to have to run it forever, or he's probably going to go out of business, either voluntarily or involuntarily. He's going to liquidate the business voluntarily, or he's going to be forced out of the business involuntarily through bankruptcy. And so, if that is the data, if that is the statistics, then that should be sobering, because you don't want to be part of the 80%. You want to be a part of the 20%. And you don't even want to be a part of the 20%. You want to be top 5%. That you exit, and you exit well. And those type of exits, generally 80 or 90% of those exits are planned. They're thoughtfully strategized, and things happen far in advance of the actual event. And that's really what I'm talking about here, is that, there are only really three things, well, four really. Four is that you're going to live forever and run your business way into the decades and centuries. That ain't going to happen. You're going to pass it on to a family or a partner, a member of the family or a partner, or your employees. You're going to sell it to a third party, someone you don't know, or you're going to go out of business, as I said before. Those are your three options of getting out of business, really. And so if those are the options, then pick which one you want, and then start moving toward that goal. And so the original question was, how soon should you start planning for an exit? It's really never too soon. I think some of the decisions you make early in your business, if you just made the right type of decisions early in your business, it's like if you're 2% off of a trajectory. I had a pilot tell me once that, you might only be 2% off of where you're headed as you're navigating, but that 2%, you can end up 500 miles away from your destination by that variation at the beginning. And I think exits are the same way. There are things that you do when you're thinking about and positioning and building, and the type of entity that you create and the type of people that you bring on really impact what that exit is going to look like down the road. Just the people and the culture that you build. Companies with a good, solid culture where people are retained and they like to be there, and you've built in systems and everything, those type of things take years, if not decades, to create. And so when you're doing those things, you should be thinking about, what is a buyer going to be wanting to know and see in the business? I ask people when I talk to them and, give them a little coaching on the exit strategies that they need to be thinking about. I asked them, would you buy your business today in the condition it's in? If you were on the other side of the table and you were a seller and there was a buyer on the other side of the table, if you were the buyer, would you buy your business? And people, kind of look down at their shoes or desk and say, well, that's a good question. I probably wouldn't. I certainly wouldn't pay what I would want for it. And that's not a great answer to that question.
Right.
That question should be absolutely. I'd want to close that deal quick before the buyer sold or the seller changed his mind because it's such a great deal. That's the type of situation you want to be in. You want multiple people wanting to buy your business where they're out trying to outbid themselves to buy your business. And when you can create that type of energy in the negotiation process, you'll come out well.
Well, and as you know, the McDonald's brothers, before they were doing hamburgers, had a failed theater business in the LA area that didn't do too hot. And they fell into doing hamburgers, which they also didn't figure out how to franchise it. So they got their name used around the world now. But speaking of franchises, that's a subject in and of itself because that's got conditions. And when people sell, I've owned 2 franchises. One was really great and one was horrible, did not do too hot. But franchises and trying to buy and sell franchises come with conditions. So how do you address that with some of the people that you're coaching?
Well, it depends. If you're a franchisee, I've worked with a lot of franchise companies. And there's an interesting thing about franchise companies. I don't want to get too far off on a tangent here, but if you're a franchisee looking at joining a franchise company and, putting up their banner, the brand and paying them a royalty and initial franchise fee, you want to really look at and not only the contract, but, really what is behind, the management and everything is behind. The untold secret about franchising is that you often hear that 80 or 90% of the businesses that start within the first 5 years fail. Whatever it is, 70, 80, 90%, depending on who you talk to, within the first 5 years fail. Well, that same condition, those same statistics hold true for franchise companies that start. And so if you're joining an emerging franchise company, the probability is that company may not be around. And that has pretty impactful consequences to those franchisees because they're just figuring out the business too, because they may be great at flipping hamburgers or making yogurt or cutting hair or whatever the franchise is. But franchising is an entirely different business than the core concept. They can be really good at what they do, but if they get involved in another business, there's different dynamics. So you got to be really careful in franchising. But for a franchisee that's joining a franchise company, they should definitely think about the agreement they're signing, what the conditions are on transfer of that agreement. What are the conditions? Are people going to be able to transfer their agreement, or does the buyer of the franchise company, the franchisee, are they going to have to execute a new franchise agreement, which may be entirely different? The royalties may be higher or different conditions. So you have to understand and know, and that comes back to, your question earlier, when should you start planning for an exit? Well, in a franchise situation, you should plan it from the day you signed that agreement. Even before you sign the agreement, you should be thinking about, because someday you're going to be selling that franchise. And you should think about, well, what is the buyer going to have to do to assume that agreement or sign a new agreement? And that can have really impactful decision on the valuation of your franchise company, your franchise. And people just don't give that a lot of thought. They just execute the agreement and move on. And 5, 10, 15 years later, they're wanting to sell their franchise, and they show up at the franchise company's door and saying, I want to sell my agreement. And they say, well, here are the conditions for selling your franchise. You can't sell it. In fact, you have to sell it to me. They have first right of refusal. You have to sell it to me. And I get to dictate the terms of that sale because I get preferential treatment. So there's a whole series of questions you need to ask. So anytime I get involved in coaching or talking to a company, a person that's thinking about getting into franchise or is in a franchise, The last thing you want to do is own a franchise, try to sell a franchise, and be surprised at the closing table of the conditions of a transfer of that franchise. And so those are the type of things that you need to get sorted out before you start talking about your exit strategy.
A few years back, I partnered with my good friend John Maxwell to promote his simulcast out of Atlanta, and one of the speakers was the son of the founder of Chick-fil-A, and the founder was still in the business into his 90s, and his son, who runs it now, is in his 70s. But for at least they had a good culture for their employees.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, an amazing culture, and it's all servant oriented and people friendly, and they've left their mark. And as you know, Disney has Disney training, and which is very specific leadership types of principles, and Chick-fil-A has been very successful in that respect. And they're very good about vetting the people that can even have a franchise, and they send the potential franchisees down to his house to hang out with him at his house, have a barbecue. I suppose they're cooking chicken and waffle fries.
I think you can bet on that.
But there are some good franchises. There are benefits, but there's a lot of ones that are. I've talked to friends of mine that, I think I'm going to turn this business that I've been working in myself, I think I'll turn that into a franchise and sell franchises. And just kind of out of thin air, they're going to come up with something that it might be good for them, but for nobody else.
Well, two things on Chick-fil-A. I took one of my grandsons out to dinner. I take him out, to eat every once in a while. And I said, "Where do you want to go?" He's 9 years old. "Where do you want to go?" And he went, "Chick-fil-A." I said, "What do you want to go to Chick-fil-A?" "I don't know. I just always go to Chick-fil-A, and because we went, and I had never had their BLT chicken deluxe sandwich, and I haven't had one of those before there, and I had it, and it was really good. I was surprised, actually. But the second thing on that is that there's I don't remember the exact numbers, but something like 14,000 franchise applications for every franchise they grant.
Yeah.
And so they can be pretty picky. And generally, a franchisee is someone that's come up through the ranks.
Right.
And, so it does have a great culture there, and value-driven culture.
Absolutely. I have a good friend who actually lives in Sacramento now, but he was up in the Bay Area and opened up the very first Jersey Mike's franchise. His parents owned Southern California. They sent him up to open up. I think he's opened up like 60 or 70 Jersey Mike's sub franchises in the Bay Area. Then he went and got married and moved to Sacramento to find a house that him and his sweet wife could get a hold of there. So the good friend, and also really, I ended up knowing him because he was very generous about donating lunches to my Young Life golf tournaments where we raise money to work with high school kids. So really neat guy. But that was we're talking too much about food. So let's talk about something different here. What are you finding that been busy with? You got your podcast. Sounds great. And you've been interviewing.
Yeah, I just love, what this has really grown into is this whole idea of mentoring and coaching, because the problem with exiting and, not really surrounding yourself with the right type of people is that you don't get too many times at the plate. Some people will work a lifetime, for their business, and they started it in their 20s or 30s and their 50s or 60s, and they're getting ready to step away from the business. And it's the only time that they're going to go through this process. So they just don't know what they don't know. And to be able to kind of open up the kimono and show them, there is a process involved. And then to see people exit that and follow this process and walk away with, more than they thought they were going to ever get for their business because they did the right things a few years earlier, is just really gratifying and satisfying. And so I just get really charged up. I'm very passionate about this topic because I've seen the devastation that a family experiences when they're depending on the sale of their business to fund their retirement. And it doesn't go well. And it changes their lives and the lives of their children and grandchildren because, they don't have the amount of money they thought they were going to have in retirement and what they wanted to leave for their posterity. And those are some sad situations. The issue is it just does not have to happen that way. People get caught with their pants down because they think it's just going to turn out well. And it doesn't always do that. But it doesn't have to be that way. That's the message. If there's a takeaway from our discussion here, it just doesn't have to be that way. If you just take some time and plan. In fact, if the subtitle of my book is, how to double the amount of money you put into your pocket when you sell your business. It isn't that all that difficult if you do the right things. I can tell you that from experience. This is experience speaking, not only the experience of me, but for the hundreds of people and stories that have been on my podcast of actual transactions. These are real life stories of real people that have hit it over the fence and done well and stood at the plate and struck out. And it's just fascinating stories that are shared on the podcast. And any entrepreneur out there that wants to pick up tips and hints and learn about what others have done so they don't have to make the same mistake should subscribe to the podcast. And it's well worth a few minutes of listening because you'll be really intrigued with some great things that people do and some really stupid things that people do when they're getting ready to exit their business.
Guilty as charged, I'm sure. So how can I help you today, Marvin? Great to have you with me. I'm speaking with Marvin Storm up there in the Sacramento area. And how can I help you today? Do you have, what's the name of your podcast and what would you like me to direct people to you?
Well, what I might do is for your audience there that are listening in, I've prepared a report and is about the process we've been talking about here, and it's really the subtitle of my book is How to Double the Amount of Money You Put in Your Pocket When You Sell Your Business. It's a free report. It's about a 10-page report. Just kind of outlines the big picture process. Just go to businessexitstories.com/report and get a free download of that, and it'll be well worth the read. I can tell you that it may make a big difference in how you start thinking about positioning your company for an exit at some point in time, whether it's, a year or 5 years from now. It'll get you into that mode of thinking.
Excellent. And thank you so much for being with me. It's been a real treat. And I do have one last question. If you're ready, you ready for my question?
I am ready.
I like asking this question. It's so interesting. So what was your very first job when you were a kid or a teenager?
I was 11 years old and I started washing dishes in a restaurant. I worked Mondays, Wednesdays, Fridays, and Saturdays. I worked 3 hours during the week and then 8 hours on the weekends. And I did that, and I earned all the money for my first car, which I bought for cash when I was 16 years old, and had money for insurance and everything else. My dad made it very clear that he wasn't going to put a dime toward that car.
But you did have somebody who
started early.
You did have somebody who could at least fix it. Your dad could probably fix it, or you probably did. He send you a bill for that, by the way?
Well, he never charged me for it, but he did me a disservice because he would never really let me fix my own cars because he didn't want me to be a mechanic.
Oh, man.
So I never had the aptitude, I guess. My brothers did, but that's something I never did very well at. I could change the oil and do the brakes and stuff like that, but I couldn't overhaul the cars like my brothers could.
Well, it's funny you should say that. I actually had a Sunday school teacher when I was a teenager, our teen class, and for a teen activity, he that was back in the muscle car days, and he worked for Plymouth. He had one of those Plymouth Roadrunners with a big fin thing, and we'd meet in the church parking lot. He would show us how to gap spark plugs, check our timing light and belts, and all. How did the noises for the different things. You could tell if it was a water pump.
You could do things like that back then. You can't do that today.
No, and now it's all computers. But anyway, it's good to claim that knowledge anyway, which is not being used right now, oddly enough. So, Marvin, it's been a real treat to be with you. Thank you.
This has been delightful.
I appreciate it. And we will be in touch, my friend, and be looking forward to getting your information out about where people can get that businessexitstories.com/report. Did I get close?
Yep, that's it. businessexitstories.com/report. And just to click and download, and it's all yours.
Got it. Thank you so much. It's been great having you here. Appreciate it.
All right. Been a great chat.